Okay, in this video we're going to be learning about coefficients and variables and expressions and how to write them and how to translate them once they're written. So let's go over some basics. There are 4 operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And all of math really stems from one of those 4 operations. Once you hit about 6th grade, variables are introduced into math, and we start solving for unknowns. The higher you get in math, the more comfortable you get with variables in your equations and in your formulas, and you just get better at manipulating them. So we're just starting out here, so we're just going to go over the basics. Okay, so let's just go over some basics. This says 4x plus 8. This would be an expression. I know it's an expression because it does not have an equal sign. If it had an equal sign, let's say it said equals -10, then it would no longer be an expression, it would be an equation. And if it didn't have an equal sign, let's say that it had an inequality symbol, it would no longer be an equation, it would be an inequality. So notice that a lot of this inequality or equation, it stems from an expression first. So that's what we're going to focus on today, is just expressions. So the parts of this is a term, and this is a term. So this expression has 2 terms. And you can tell because they're divided, well, not divided, but they're separated by a plus sign. They could also be separated by a minus sign, but they could not be separated by anything else. So either plus or minus separates terms. Looking at each term individually, this has 2 factors: 4 and x. This does not have any factors because it's a constant. Um, 4x is considered factors because they're multiplying. And factors are 2 numbers that are being multiplied together. Like 2 and 3 are factors of 6 because 2 times 3 is 6. So 4 and x are factors of 4x because 4 times x is 4x. 8 does not have any factors because it's all by itself. Okay, so looking at it again, 4 is the coefficient. And coefficients are always the number right in front of the variable. X is the variable. And again, 8 is called a constant. Constants never have any variables with them. They're just numbers. Always a lone number. So let's just recap here. 4 is the coefficient, x is the variable, and 8 is the constant. So I want you to think for yourself for a minute and try to label 5y plus 12. I want you to write it in your notes, and I want you to tell me what 5 is, what y is, and what 12 is. So hopefully you've paused the video and you've already answered this question. 5, you should have said, was the coefficient. Y is the variable. And 12 is the constant. Variable is always a letter, usually a letter, and it represents something we don't know. It's an unknown. The coefficient is always a number, and the constant is always a number. Okay, so let's look at your first page in notes here. Notice again that we're dividing to 4 operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So there's some key words when you're reading a word problem or when you're translating words into algebra that you should listen for. Let's just go down through them. Other key phrases for addition could be plus, more than, the sum of, the total of, increased by, and added to. There are more, but these are the most common, and the one I want you to put an asterisk by or circle is the word sum. That is the true mathematical term for addition. So let's write it over here. Whoops. So sum is the correct or the most correct way to say addition. So what we're going to do now is go through these and write down the algebra way to say them. So a number plus 3. So we could say x plus 3. We could also say 3 plus x. Both of those are fine. You can put either way. The second one says 10 more than a number. So we could say x plus 10 or 10 plus x. Go ahead and try to do some of these by yourself, and then we'll go over them, and you'll see whether you have them right or wrong. So go ahead and pause and try to finish the rest of them, and then I'll display the answers. This could be written as x plus 5 or 5 plus x. The next says a total of 6 in some number. Could be x plus 6 or 6 plus x. A number increased by 2, x plus 2, 2 plus x. 11 added to a number, x plus 11, 11 plus x. Notice that addition can be flipped around, and it's fine. There's nothing wrong with writing it, like if you call this forwards and this backwards, doesn't matter, you can write them either way. Okay, let's look at subtraction. Of course, minus is the first one. Less than, the difference of, less, decreased by, and subtracted from. Now, there are some in here that we need to make a note of. Less than, I'm going to circle this, and I'm going to draw a backwards arrow. When you see the word less than, you're going to flip your algebraic expression around. And there's only one way to write subtraction. Like in addition, we could write it 2 different ways. Subtraction, there's only one way, and you have to get it that way. So this will hopefully make more sense in a minute. The one I want you to circle is difference, too. And difference is the correct way to say subtraction in math. Okay, so let's go ahead and start writing these. If you think you already know, you can do them and then just watch and see what the answers are. But if you're not sure, then you should listen because subtraction is very tricky. Alright, a number minus 7. It has to be the variable minus 7. It doesn't have to be x. It could be m or n or b or c. It doesn't matter. But I'm just going to write x. But notice it's written exactly the way that it says here. You know, a number x minus 7. The next one says 4 less than a number. This is one of the ones I circled, and we have to be really careful because when it says less than, the key word there is than, then you're going to flip them around. So instead of writing, if you read it, it says 4 less than a number. It seems like it's going to be 4 minus n or x or whatever. But in reality, you write it x minus 4. You have to flip them around. So this is not right. So be really careful. If it says less than, then you're going to be flipping. Alright, the next one says the difference of a number and 3. So difference is the true mathematical term for subtraction, and it behaves perfectly. It's exactly what you think it would be. A number minus 3. So x minus 3. The difference of a number and 3. 9 less a number. Notice it doesn't say less than. It doesn't say less than, so you don't flip it. It just says 9 minus a number. And then the next one says a number decreased by 12. You don't flip this one. It doesn't have the word than in there, so it's just x minus 12. Okay, this one is a little tricky. It says 6 subtracted from a number. So this one you do flip. It'll be x minus 6 because 6 is being subtracted from that number. So that number has to come first. Okay, the next operation is multiplication. And of course, everybody says times. The true mathematical term for multiplication is product. So we're going to circle this. And another way to say multiplication by 2 is like twice or double. And then of course 3 would be triple. And everybody also says multiplied. It's very common. And then another way in math that you say multiply is the word of. So if you see something like half of 12, then you would take half times 12, because of means multiply. So let's write over here product, because that is the real word, the most correct word to say times. Okay, so we're going to be writing these in algebraic. If you think you already know, then go ahead. If not, then follow along. So 8 times a number it can be written a couple different ways. It could be written as 8 times x, or 8 times, you can use parentheses if my pen will write. 8 times x, that would be fine too. Most people write it the simplest way, which is just 8x, and that's normally how you see it written. You could also use an asterisk, like 8 times x, but notice all the other ways take longer, and most people are lazy. In fact, the best mathematicians are lazy. So this one is, I think, the best way to write it, and so we're going to circle that one. That's what we're going to aim for. But you could definitely write it any of those 4 ways. Alright, the next one says a product. So product means multiply. The product of 14 and a number. So that's going to be 14 times x, which we're just going to write 14x. And then this one says twice a number or double a number. Well, twice a number would be 2 times that number, which would be 2 times x, which would be 2x. And it could be 2m, 2c, doesn't matter. But just 2 times the variable. And the next one says a number multiplied by -6. It would be -6 times x, and you would write it -6x. So the coefficient always goes before the variable, and if it's being multiplied, you just put them very close together. And then this one says 3/4 of a number. That was hard for me to say. 3/4 times a number, because of is multiply. So you just write it 3/4 and then x beside it. You could also write it 3x over 4, but you cannot write it 3 and then with x on the bottom. Whoops, sorry. So this is the only way you can't write that. You can't put the variable in the denominator. The variable either needs to be off to the side, like this one, or it needs to be in the numerator, like this one. It means something different when you put it in the denominator. It means that you're dividing by x instead of multiplying by x, which would change what the algebraic, it would change the problem altogether. Okay, division is the quotient. So quotient is the true way to say divide, and so we're going to write that down. Quotient is a weird word. It's actually hard to spell if you haven't spelled it for a while, but it is what it is. So the quotient of is a way to say division. Divided by, of course, is a way to say division, and the ratio of is a way to say division. And fraction bar, let's go ahead and write that one in. The fraction bar is probably the most used. So fraction bar. That also means divided by. So in other words, like 2/3, I'm going to write it over here. When you say this out loud, this is said 2 divided by 3. That's what 2/3 is. Fractions are division problems. Alright, so we're going to try some of these ourselves. And the good news is that quotient is exactly what you think it would be. They always give you whatever is in the numerator first. So the number, which will be a variable, let's say x. X. And is division. Like, not always, but in this case, because it's a quotient. So the number and 7. So the first number they give you will be in your numerator. Then the second number they give you will be in your denominator. And it'll always be like that. It never gets flipped around, never gets changed. However they say it is how you write it. Okay, so it says 10 divided by a number. And again, that would be a fraction. So 10 divided by a number. Or you could write it like old school and say 10 divided by a number. And that's fine too. It says the same thing. And the next one says a ratio of a number to 15. Ratios can be written 3 different ways. So a number to 15 could be x to 15, or x to 15, or x to 15. And this is probably the most common way to write a ratio. Okay, so we've moved away from the 4 operations, multiplication, division, subtraction, and addition, and now we're just going to basic terms in math. So there are actually other ways to say equals. Of course, you can use your equal sign, and you can say equals. This one I think is really important. Is, in word problems, is what they use. They don't say equals most of the time, or they might say totaled, something like that. But is very, very common. So we definitely want to know that one. And I could say is the same as, and that would be the same thing. Yields and amounts to. All of these are ways to say equals. So we're starting to get a little bit harder here. It says 7 less than a number equals 10. So go ahead and try to write it first. I'm going to circle something really important here. Notice it says less than, so we have to be really careful. So 7 less than a number equals 10. So we're actually going to flip these two around because of the less than. So the number, or x, will come first, minus 7, and then equals 10. So take that in for a minute. We had to flip it around because of the less than, and then it was just equals 10. The next one says 3 times a number is negative 6. So 3 times a number, so 3 times x is equals negative 6. Notice that didn't sound like an equation, like it sounded like a sentence. 3 times a number is negative 6. But when you write it in algebra, this is what it looks like. The next one says 8 is the same as twice a number. So 8 equals the same as, same thing, is equals twice a number. So 2 times some number. And we'll call that number x. The next one says 12 added to a number yields 5. So 12 added to some number yields, so don't forget that's equals 5. So that's how you would write that one. This one says 9 less a number. So it doesn't say less than, it just says less. So we're not going to flip this. We're going to leave it in the order that it was given. So 9 less a number amounts to, that means equals 20. So hopefully this is making sense. Okay, another thing that you're going to be hearing or seeing are powers, exponents. And I have x to the n, but n could be any number. If it was 2, it would be squared. If it was 3, it would be cubed. 4 and above just get called x to the 4th, x to the 5th, x to the 6th. They don't get special names. But if it was x squared, we're going to write it here. Let's put it here. Okay. If it were x squared, which means a 2, then it's squared. It actually has a special name. If it was cubed, which is x cubed, like 3, if I could write 3, that has a special name, and that's x cubed. So some of the powers have special names, but most of them do not. Okay, so we're going to write some expressions. It says the square of a number, or that number squared. And that's normally, they say a number squared, which would be x to the 2nd power. And there's no other way to write that. The next one says a cube of a number, or the cube of a number, the number cubed. And that has to be x to the 3rd power, and there's no other way to write that. And again, cubed is 3, and squared is 2. Okay, the last one on this page is the distributive property. And it gets spoken different than everything else. So you have to be really, really careful. And it says times the sum of. So that would look something like, let's say it said 3 times the sum of x and 2. It would look like this. So 3 times, because we're going to distribute, 3 times the sum, and don't forget sum means add, the sum of x and 2. So all of your distributive property will have parentheses in them. And the next one says times the difference of, so that might look something like 5 times x minus 4, okay? Because difference means subtraction, and so we have to have a subtraction problem. And if it says times the difference of, then you have to have the parentheses. And it'll once you get more practice in, it'll make more sense. And then the last one is double the sum of, but that would have to be a 2 out front, because the double would dictate that number. It would have to be a 2 times the sum. We'd have to be adding something, and let's just say it was something plus 7. So let's do some examples here. Alright, so the first example says 3 times the sum of x and 5. I don't remember what I just wrote down, but it might have been close to that. Okay, so 3 times the sum of x and 5. The next one says 9 less than, so we have to be careful, less than, so we're going to be flipping these. 9 less than 3 times the sum of j and k. 9 less than 3 times the sum of j and k. Alright, so we're going to, at the very end, we're going to say minus 9, because we have to write this at the end, 9 less than, because we have to flip them around. So then we're going to look at it, and we're going to see what this part says. 3 times the sum of j and k. So 3 times the sum of j and k. So that less than, it really kind of messes things up because it makes you flip everything. A little confusing. Alright, next one says 5 times the difference of x and y. So 5 times the difference, so that would be a subtraction problem, of x and y. And you can't write it the other way around. You can't have y first because it's given to you in this order and you have to follow that order. Alright, the last one says double the sum of a and b. So double dictates that 2 and the sum is adding of a and b. So add a and b and then times it by 2.